Imagine you're heading out for a weekend ride, and everything feels normal, but your motorcycle has actually been warning you for weeks. A rough idle, extra chain slack, a softer brake lever, small things easy to ignore, and that's exactly how expensive repairs get started. The good news is almost every one of these mistakes is easy to catch once you know what to look for. Here are 15 of the most common mistakes Honda owners make, from cruisers to adventure bikes to commuters, and how to avoid every single one. Mistake number 1. Ignoring recommended oil change intervals. Mistake number 1 is ignoring the recommended oil change interval, or worse, guessing at it instead of checking the owner's manual. Every Honda engine, whether it's the parallel twin in a Rebel 500, the flat 6 in a Gold Wing, or the single-cylinder engine in a CRF 300L, has a specific service interval based on how that engine is built and how it's expected to be used. Riders who assume all motorcycles follow the same 3,000-mile rule that used to be common advice for older cars are often surprised to learn Honda's intervals are usually longer, but that doesn't mean oil quality stops mattering. Over time, oil breaks down, loses viscosity, and becomes less effective at protecting the valve train and clutch, especially in wet clutch systems where the oil also lubricates the transmission and clutch plates. Riders overlook this because oil changes feel like a formality rather than a safeguard. If neglected long enough, the result can be accelerated wear on cam lobes, increased engine noise, and in more serious cases, damage to bearings from oil that's lost its protective properties. An oil and filter change on most Honda motorcycles typically runs somewhere in the range of $30 to $80 in parts if you're doing it yourself, more if a shop handles it, which is a small price next to a top-end rebuild. The simplest fix is to follow the interval printed in your specific model's manual and to use the oil weight and rating Honda recommends rather than whatever is cheapest on the shelf. This is not urgent in the sense of an emergency, but it is not something to keep pushing back either, because oil-related wear is cumulative and rarely reversible. There's another problem many experienced riders still overlook, and it has to do with something most people check even less often than oil. Mistake number 2. Neglecting chain maintenance. Mistake number 2 is neglecting chain maintenance on chain-driven models like the CB650R, CBR650R, Hornet, Africa Twin, and Transalp. A chain that runs dry or too loose doesn't just wear out faster, it can also damage the front and rear sprockets. And in extreme cases of neglect, a chain can jump or even snap, which is a genuine safety concern. The reason this gets overlooked is that a chain can look fine at a glance even when it's due for cleaning and lubrication, since dirt and grime often hide the true condition of the O-rings and rollers. Riders in dry, dusty climates need to lubricate more often, not less, because dust combines with old lubricant to form an abrasive paste that accelerates wear. Signs to watch for include visible rust, a dry or dull-looking chain, excessive slack beyond what your specific model's manual specifies, or a chain that looks tight in one spot and loose in another, which usually means uneven wear. A full chain and sprocket replacement can run anywhere from roughly $150 to over $300 depending on the model and whether you use OEM or aftermarket parts, while a bottle of chain lube and 10 minutes every few hundred miles costs almost nothing. This is worth addressing promptly, ideally before your next ride, since a severely neglected chain is one of the few maintenance issues that can turn into a sudden, rideable one moment, not the next kind of failure. But that's not the mistake that causes the most expensive repairs on adventure and touring bikes specifically. Mistake number 3. Skipping valve clearance inspections. Mistake number 3 is skipping valve clearance inspections on models that require them, including many CRF 450RL owners doing serious off-road riding, as well as some CB and CBR engines at their specified intervals. Valve clearance naturally changes over thousands of miles as components wear, and Honda specifies exact intervals for a reason. When clearances drift out of spec, and they usually tighten over time on most designs, the valve may not seat fully, which can lead to a burnt valve, reduced compression, and a rough running or underpowered engine. This gets ignored, partly because it isn't a quick check like tire pressure. It usually requires removing bodywork and using feeler gauges, so many owners simply aren't aware it's due. Warning signs include a ticking or tapping sound from the top of the engine, harder starting, or a noticeable loss of smooth power delivery. Catching this early through a proper valve clearance check generally costs far less than the alternative, since a valve job or head repair from a badly out-of-spec engine can run into several $100s or more, depending on the model and the extent of the damage. This isn't an emergency-level urgency for most street bikes, but it is genuinely time-sensitive, meaning it should happen within the interval Honda specifies rather than being pushed to someday. Mistake number 4. Letting coolant go too long without service. Mistake number 4 is running the cooling system with old or incorrect coolant, which applies to liquid-cooled Hondas like the Africa Twin, NC750X, CBR650R, and Goldwing. Coolant isn't just there to prevent freezing, it also contains corrosion inhibitors that protect the water pump, radiator, and internal passages from rust and mineral buildup. Owners often assume coolant lasts indefinitely since it rarely needs topping up, but the corrosion-fighting additives do break down over time, even if the fluid still looks fine. Mixing incompatible coolant types, or topping off with plain water in an emergency, and forgetting to correct it later can also reduce the coolant's effectiveness. Warning signs include a temperature gauge running higher than normal, coolant that looks rusty or has visible particles, or a slow, unexplained drop in coolant level. Left unaddressed, this can lead to overheating, a damaged water pump seal, or in worst cases, a warped cylinder head, which is a considerably more expensive repair. A standard coolant flush and refill is a relatively affordable service compared to cooling system component replacement, so this falls into the category of preventable if you simply follow Honda's recommended coolant replacement interval, which is usually measured in years as much as miles. There's another problem many riders assume only affects older bikes, but it actually affects newer ones just as much. Mistake number 5. Letting the battery sit unused too long. Mistake number 5 is letting the battery sit unused for extended periods, especially on bikes that see seasonal storage, like Goldwings and Shadows in colder climates. Modern Honda motorcycles rely on a healthy battery not just to start the engine but to support the ECU, fuel injection system, and in many models, ABS and traction control systems. A battery that's allowed to deeply discharge, especially repeatedly, loses capacity permanently over time, which is different from simply needing a jump start. This is easy to overlook because bikes stored over winter or during a busy season don't give obvious warning signs until the moment you try to start them. Watch for slow cranking, dimming dashboard lights, or a battery that needs a jump more than once in a short period. A battery that dies completely can sometimes also trigger fault codes in the electronics on more computer-dependent models, which then requires a dealer visit just to clear. Replacement batteries for most Honda motorcycles run somewhere between $60 and $150 depending on the model, while a basic trickle charger or battery tender costs a fraction of that and can prevent the issue entirely. If your bike is going to sit for more than a few weeks, connecting a maintainer isn't optional maintenance. It's genuinely preventative, and it's one of the easiest fixes on this entire list. Mistake number 6. Riding on worn or improperly adjusted brakes. Mistake number 6 is riding with worn or improperly adjusted brake components, particularly on bikes ridden frequently in stop-and-go traffic, like the PCX, ADV 160, and Forza. Brake pads wear down gradually, and because braking feel often changes slowly, riders can adapt without realizing performance has degraded. This is especially true with rear brakes, which many riders check less often than the front. Warning signs include a spongy lever or pedal feel, a squealing noise under braking, or the bike needing more distance to stop than it used to. If pads wear down to the metal backing, the resulting damage to the rotor is far more expensive to fix than a simple pad replacement would have been. And in the worst scenario, brake performance can be compromised at a moment when you need it most. Brake pads are one of the more affordable maintenance items on a motorcycle, generally costing far less than a warped or damaged rotor, so this is very much a case where a small proactive expense avoids a much larger reactive one. This is not something to wait on. Brakes affect safety directly, so any unusual change in braking field deserves a prompt inspection rather than a "we'll see" approach. Mistake number 7. Neglecting air filter replacement. Mistake number 7 is neglecting air filter replacement or cleaning, which matters across nearly every Honda motorcycle but is especially relevant for CRF 300L and CRF 450RL owners who ride in dusty or muddy conditions. A clogged air filter restricts airflow into the engine, which can throw off the air-fuel mixture, reduce power, and in more extreme cases, allow unfiltered debris past a torn or improperly seated filter. Riders overlook this because a dirty air filter doesn't usually cause a dramatic symptom right away. The power loss can be gradual enough that it feels normal. Signs include reduced throttle response, slightly rougher idle, or noticeably lower fuel efficiency. On fuel-injected models, a badly restricted filter can also cause the ECU to run a richer mixture than intended, which over time can contribute to carbon buildup. Air filters are inexpensive compared to nearly any other component on this list. And for off-road models, checking the filter after every ride in dusty or wet conditions is a habit worth building. This isn't urgent in the sense of immediate danger, but it's one of the easiest maintenance items to get consistently right, so there's little excuse for skipping it. Mistake number 8. Ignoring unusual sounds or vibrations. Mistake number 8 is ignoring unusual sounds or vibrations rather than investigating them early. This one isn't specific to a component, it's a mindset issue that applies to any Honda model, from a Grom to a Goldwing. Riders often develop a habit of tuning out small noises, especially if the bike still runs fine otherwise. The problem is that vibration or noise is frequently the first sign of a developing issue, whether it's a loose fastener, a worn bearing, an exhaust leak, or early clutch wear. Because these bikes are engineered for smoothness, any new sound is genuinely a signal worth paying attention to rather than a quirk to get used to. The cost of investigating a new noise early is usually just time, a quick inspection, or a conversation with a mechanic, while the cost of ignoring it can range widely depending on what's actually wrong. If a noise is new, gets louder over time, or changes with engine speed or throttle input in a way you can't explain, that's worth addressing sooner rather than later. This is the kind of mistake that doesn't have a single fixed urgency level because it depends entirely on what the underlying cause turns out to be. A general rule that holds across nearly every model is that noises tied to engine speed usually point toward something internal, while noises tied to bumps or braking usually point toward chassis or suspension components. And knowing that distinction alone can help you describe the problem accurately to a mechanic. Mistake number 9. Running the wrong tire pressure. Mistake number 9 is using the wrong tire pressure, or checking it so rarely that the actual pressure drifts well away from spec. This affects every model on this list, but it shows up differently, depending on use case. From the Rebel 300 in city traffic to the Africa Twin on mixed terrain, correct tire pressure affects handling, braking distance, tire wear pattern, and even fuel efficiency. Riders tend to check pressure only when a tire looks visibly low, but tires lose pressure gradually and consistently, even without a puncture, especially with seasonal temperature swings. Underinflated tires wear unevenly along the edges and generate more heat, which can lead to premature tire failure, while overinflated tires reduce the contact patch and can make handling feel unpredictable, especially when leaned over in a turn. This is a genuinely low-cost fix. A tire gauge costs very little, and checking pressure takes under a minute. Given how directly tire condition affects safety and handling, this is worth doing at least monthly, and always before any longer ride. Mistake number 10. Delaying clutch adjustment or replacement. Mistake number 10 is delaying clutch adjustment or replacement on models with manual clutches such as the CB500F, CBR500R, and Hornet. Clutch cables stretch over time on cable-operated systems, and even hydraulic clutches can develop issues if fluid isn't maintained. A clutch that isn't adjusted properly can slip under load, meaning the engine revs without a proportional increase in power delivery, particularly noticeable when accelerating hard or riding two up. This gets overlooked because a slightly slipping clutch doesn't feel dramatically different at first, especially to less experienced riders who may not have a strong reference point for how the clutch should feel. Warning signs include the engine revving higher than expected relative to your speed, a clutch lever that feels different at the friction point than it used to, or reduced acceleration despite normal throttle input. If a slipping clutch is ridden long enough, the plates can overheat and wear prematurely, and full clutch pack replacement is considerably more expensive than a simple cable or fluid adjustment would have been. This is worth checking whenever the clutch feel changes noticeably, since catching it at the adjustment stage is dramatically cheaper than catching it at the replacement stage. There's another problem that shares a lot in common with this one, but it involves an entirely different transmission type. Mistake number 11, neglecting CVT maintenance. Mistake number 11 is neglecting CVT maintenance on scooters like the PCX, ADV160, and Forza. Unlike manual transmission motorcycles, these models use a belt-driven continuously variable transmission, and that belt, along with rollers and other CVT components, wears over time and needs periodic inspection and replacement according to Honda's service schedule. Because CVT scooters don't have a clutch lever or gear shifter to give tactile feedback, many owners simply assume the transmission is maintenance-free, which isn't accurate. Warning signs of a worn CVT belt or rollers include hesitation during acceleration, unusual vibration at certain speeds, or a burning rubber smell in extreme cases. If a CVT belt fails completely while riding, the scooter can lose drive entirely, which is inconvenient at best and unsafe at worst if it happens in traffic. Because CVT components are somewhat specialized, replacement is best left to a qualified technician, and while it's not something that needs constant attention, it absolutely needs to happen at the intervals specified in the owner's manual rather than being ignored indefinitely. This one is worth flagging for your next scheduled service if it's coming due, rather than treating it as optional. Mistake number 12, using incorrect aftermarket parts or fluids. Mistake number 12 is using aftermarket parts or fluids that don't match manufacturer specifications, particularly with oil viscosity, brake fluid type, and fork oil. Not every aftermarket part is a problem. Plenty of reputable aftermarket components perform well, but using an incorrect specification, like the wrong brake fluid type, in a system designed for a different one, can cause seal damage or reduced braking performance over time. This mistake often comes from good intentions, riders trying to save money or thinking fluid is fluid without realizing that specifications exist because of real compatibility, differences with seals, gaskets, and internal tolerances. Signs of a problem can include spongy brakes after a fluid change, unusual leaks, or a noticeable change in suspension feel after a fork oil service. The safest approach is simply to check your owner's manual or a trusted Honda parts resource before substituting fluids or components, since the cost of doing it righted the first time is negligible compared to correcting seal or system damage afterward. This isn't urgent if you haven't made a substitution yet, but if you have and you're seeing any of these symptoms, it's worth having a mechanic take a look sooner rather than later. Mistake number 13, overlooking suspension maintenance. Mistake number 13 is overlooking suspension maintenance, particularly fork oil changes and shock inspection, which matters most on adventure and off-road models like the Africa Twin, Transalp, and RF450RL that see more aggressive use. Suspension fluid degrades with heat cycling and use, gradually losing its damping consistency, and seals can wear or begin leaking without necessarily looking dramatic at first. Riders overlook this because worn suspension doesn't usually cause a sudden failure. It just gradually reduces control and comfort, which many riders adjust to without realizing performance has dropped. Signs to watch for include visible oil residue on the fork tubes, a bike that feels harsher or bouncier than it used to, or noticeably reduced stability over rough terrain. Left unaddressed long enough, worn seals can allow contamination into the fork internals, leading to more expensive repairs than a scheduled fluid service would have required. This is a maintenance item worth scheduling proactively based on the interval in your specific model's manual, especially if you ride off-road frequently, since suspension performance ties directly into how predictably the bike handles. Mistake number 14, skipping recall and service bulletin checks. Mistake number 14 is skipping the manufacturer's recall and service bulletin checks. Like any manufacturer, Honda occasionally issues recalls or technical service bulletins for specific models and model years to address a defined issue, and these are typically handled free of charge at a dealer. Owners overlook this simply because it doesn't occur to them to check, especially with a used bike where the original owner may never have addressed an open recall. This isn't about assuming your bike has a problem. Most don't. It's about a 5-minute check using your VIN on Honda's official recall lookup or through a dealer just to confirm there's nothing outstanding. Since recall repairs are free, this is genuinely the easiest item on this entire list. There's no cost and no real effort involved beyond checking. If you've never done this on your specific bike, especially a used one, it's worth doing this week rather than assuming everything is fine by default. Mistake number 15. Not keeping a maintenance log. Mistake number 15, and this is the one that ties every other mistake on this list together, is not keeping a maintenance log or record of service history. Without a written record, it's easy to lose track of when the oil was last changed, when the chain was last adjusted, or when the valves were last checked, which means small maintenance windows get missed simply because nobody remembers the last date or mileage. This affects every rider regardless of experience level, and it's especially costly for owners who buy used Hondas without a documented history, since it forces guesswork on nearly every component discussed in this video. The fix costs nothing, a simple notebook, spreadsheet, or notes app entry every time you service the bike. Beyond preventing missed maintenance, a documented service history also protects resale value, since buyers trust a well-documented motorcycle far more than one with an unknown past. This isn't urgent in the traditional sense, but starting today costs you nothing and pays off every single time you need to answer the question, when was this last done? Even a rough record, dates, and odometer readings jotted down after every service is enough to keep every other mistake on this list from sneaking up on you. The bottom line. So here's the bottom line. None of these 15 mistakes are really about bad riders or unreliable motorcycles. Honda has built a well-earned reputation for durability across everything from the Grom to the Goldwing, and these bikes are genuinely capable of high mileage with proper care. The mistakes on this list are almost all about small habits: checking the chain, watching the tire pressure, listening for new sounds, keeping a record that quietly compound over time if they're ignored. Catching any one of these early is almost always inexpensive and straightforward. Catching them late is where the real cost shows up, in money, in downtime, and occasionally in safety. So take 10 minutes this week, walk around your bike, check the basics, and if something feels off, don't wait for it to feel more off before you look into it. If this helped you catch something on your own bike, consider subscribing for more honest, practical Honda content, and ride safe out there.